Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Disney's Encanto just won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature earlier this week. I spoke with writer-director Jared Bush about growing up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, before creating the likes of Zootopia, Moana, and Encanto. Jared, thanks so much for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you.
Now, we were talking before you got on here. You remember TOP from your days growing up in Gaithersburg.
Of course, WTOP on my commute in. Always listen to it. My parents were like, "Boop." Yes, it was a morning routine, and then later when I had a job in DC, my dad would drive me to work, and we'd listen to it on the way in every day. So this is a treat for me.
Well, no, the treat is for all of our listeners getting to, talk to the man behind, all the songs they've been hearing throughout their house over the last many months. Tell me, I want to get into all of that, but take me into Oscar night. I mean, congrats on winning. That's got to be a dream come true. What's that moment like when you're sitting there and your name gets called?
Oh man, well, it's nerve-wracking, because I think this year there were so many excellent movies that were all up, and we've all become friends over the course of the last few months. Many of them I've worked with before, Don Hall and Carlos, who did Raya and the Last Dragon. I'm very good friends with them. They helped me with Encanto, likewise for Enrico and Andrea. So I knew them really well. And then all of the Mitchell's guys I got to know over the course of the last few months. And then the entire team from Fraley is amazing. So I'd say when you're sitting there, my heart's beating out of my chest because you truly don't know. It could go many different ways. All of it is exciting, but when they said it, it was, like your heart stops for a second, and then you realize, I should probably get up there quickly. The big secret is you have very limited time to talk, which they tell you in advance, but the amount of time it takes you to walk is a part of that time. So if you take 30 seconds to walk up, you can talk for 10 seconds. Right. So you kind of want to get up there because I really wanted to be able to say something to my family. That was really important, but I knew that was the last thing I was going to say. So it was to business.
Oh man. And so, like, as you mentioned, such a stacked year too, with Raya and Luca and Mitchell's and Flea. I mean, that might be any other year, any of them could have won, but not 100%. Going up against the juggernaut of Encanto, baby. Well, what was the rest of the day? The rest of the night, were you able to enjoy it? Because even just us covering it, I mean, man, obviously the elephant in the room was the big, Will Smith, Chris Rock thing. But were you? I definitely don't want to ask anything about who was right or wrong, because this is your time to celebrate. But just describe what it was like being there, and how the air just kind of came out of the room.
Well, so it's interesting. I had no idea. I was backstage. After you win, you go and do a bunch of interviews and pictures, and I was back there for about an hour. So I had no idea it happened. Wow. We did all of that, and it was amazing and fun. And we got back to our seats, and like something was different, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And my friends were like, "You missed something kind of big," and they were explaining to me, but it didn't. I was like, that's not like, I didn't see it. So I must admit, like, is it a joke? Like, I don't understand what happened, because I couldn't wrap my brain around it. So weirdly, I missed the whole thing. And I was also said the only time I've been to the Oscars prior to this was on Zootopia. And that night, my friend said, "Hey, there's a party afterwards. We need you to get out of the room real quick and take a place in line. And that would be great." And I was like, no problem. So I missed the last 10 minutes of the last Oscars, which was the year that Warren Beatty and Moonlight and La La Land. So I missed that moment too. So basically what happens is, if I'm ever lucky enough to go to the Oscars and I leave the room, something enormous happens that I miss. And that's my takeaway.
Yeah, but Oscars, don't get the wrong takeaway, Oscars. Keep giving the man awards.
No, please.
And you wrote for the Smiths on the CW show, right? All of us, they're creative. Yeah. So that's got to be even more bizarre for you. But,
no. I mean, as I was walking up, he gave me a nice congratulations on the way to the stage. So, it's I'd say, again, not having been there, I don't have any of the actual context, so it'd be one of those things where I'm going to have to talk to other people.
Sure. Well, you know what? Enough about that. It's taken up too much of the attention from all the winners anyway. So let's get down to why we wanted to talk with you. Hometown hero, made good from Gaithersburg. Right. I want to go a little chronologically if we can through your journey. Yeah. So you grew up in Gaithersburg, Maryland. how did you make movies as a kid? How did you get into loving movies?
I did. I remember it specifically when I was 12, my dad got a video camera, and this is back in the 80s, and that was a big deal. And so me and my family, my brother, my really good friends, we would make home movies all the time, and they were all ridiculous. But we loved it. I loved it. And we kept on doing it. And so I found that that type of storytelling was exciting to me. And after college, I was like, I want to move to Hollywood and get into that industry. And people were like, and do what? I was like, I have no idea. And luckily my parents were supportive of this crazy notion. And they're like, follow your dreams, whatever those are that you don't know yet. So I moved out to Los Angeles, and I had kind of a very indirect route to the job that I have now. I started working at a talent agency. I didn't want to be an agent, but people said it's a great education. The weird thing was, and the perfect thing was, my job there, the biggest job was to read scripts and then to write what's called coverage, which is basically you do a synopsis of the story and then say, what's your impression of the writing style? Right. I read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scripts, which turned out to be the best education I could ever ask for. And then I started to meet writers, and I was like, I think these are my people. And shortly thereafter, I started trying to write my own scripts. I started in television. I think like everybody, like the first things you write, they're terrible, but the more you do it, you learn every single time. So I had some really good mentors that just said, just keep going. It's going to be awful for a very, very long time. And it was, but I was lucky enough to get hired on a TV show just as a writer's assistant, which is sort of like a writer's apprentice.
Right.
And that show went for a couple seasons, and then I got into a different show and I became a staff writer, and that went for a couple seasons. Then I moved up the road there. And then I always loved features. And so I try to do that concurrently. These are very different things, television and feature writing. It's anything you do in television doesn't really translate to features. So I had to build my career on that side. And then luckily, one day I was like, the type of movies I like are these big, entertainment for everyone type of stories. I grew up on Amblin movies, Indiana Jones, Star Wars. These are like that's what I love. And at the time, movies from Pixar and Disney were the only ones that I felt were like early 2000s were really doing that. And so I bugged Disney to give me an interview, and I got hired by Byron Howard, who's my directing partner, and he was working on a movie about animals. And I was like, I love animals. At the time, it was a spy movie, and they hired me. I was like, amazing. And my first day of work, they said, we threw that whole thing out, start from scratch. It's animals, and that's about all we had. And we created Zootopia, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. So much I want to unpack. I want to pick back up with Zootopia, but real quick, want to double back to the local angle really quick, because you went to QO, right? Quince Orchard.
I did. Yes.
Who were some of your, if you want to give a shout out, who were some of your, I don't know if they're still there, but who at the time when you were there, who were some of your, biggest mentors or your favorite teachers that got you?
Oh, wow. Well, so a couple things. One, I was when I went to Quince Orchard, it was the first year it opened. So I was actually the first, my class was 92. I was the first 4-year class of the school. Every class that was there in front of me was only there 3 years or 2 years, because juniors we had no senior class.
What were you a branch off of what other school when they opened QO?
I would have gone to Seneca Valley.
Seneca, okay.
Yeah, which where my sister went. So we were should have been in the same school, but Quince Orchard opened. So she was a senior at Seneca, and I was a freshman at Quince Orchard. Mr. Angelo, who was my music teacher, was as someone that I always looked up to. And as a musician myself, that's been hugely helpful to me. Working on musicals has been amazing. I would say that the principal at the time was Dr. Warren. And he was always a good friend to me and helped me quite a bit. Mrs. Vercel, I remember, told me I was only math and science, and I remember her saying, she was an English teacher. She's like, I think English is would be good for you. And I'm like, I don't think so. That's not really what I'm interested in. And she's like, I think you should think about it. And so that my love of creative writing came out of that. So it's a I think one of the things I always think about is, teachers have such a huge impact on you, and the right teacher who can see something in you that you don't see yourself, can be a life changer, and it certainly was for me.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks for yeah. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that high school. All right, well, back to Zootopia.
Yeah.
Talk about so obviously I guess you co-direct it. But talk about, how it wound. I mean, it goes on to win the Oscar, but just talk about how I always thought it was such a brilliant, allegory or social commentary for race and class in America, but told through these characters through a zoo in the city and everything. But talk about sort of the key to telling something with such depth. But it's got to be subtle enough that it doesn't fly over the heads of kids.
Yeah, well, it's tricky. I'd say that the biggest I think benefit to working at Disney Animation is that we have the luxury of time. Our movies take about 5 years,
Right.
from the kernel of an idea to it being in a theater. And that 5 years isn't animating it. Most of the time is spent trying to figure out the story and trying to figure out your thematics and understand your characters really well. And you have many bites of that apple to try different things, to experiment and try to get it right. So yeah, that was definitely one where, looking at, okay, we have prey and we have predators, and what is that dynamic going to be like? What are we building off of? What are those parallels to what we know in our human lives? And so we spent a lot of time researching, and a really interesting thing that we learned while we were doing that is that the natural ratio of predators to prey, or prey to predators, is 10 to 1 or 9 to 1. So 10% predators, 90% prey, which is a very interesting number breakdown if you're telling a story where there's one group that has sort of been in charge of things for a while, and another group that's been marginalized. And some of those parallels really worked to tell a story that we wanted to have people look at differently, and expectations and assumptions. But you're right, it is really hard because you don't want to hammer people over the head with a message. At the same time, you don't want people to miss that message. And so a lot of our time was spent just micro adjusting certain lines, trying to do things more visually than spoken. And luckily, we have 800 people that work on these movies. And as a result of that, we have 800 people that are giving us feedback, that are helping us, that are bringing their own experiences into that. And that's critical to telling a story like that.
Fantastic. And of course, Zootopia comes out the same year, 2016, as Moana, which you wrote the script for. I mean, I know there's a lot of, co-story credits and all that kind of stuff. But educate our listeners. How does that work? When your name, it says, written by on a Disney or a Pixar movie, is it your kernel of idea, or is it an idea that's been, battle tested in a room, and then they say, all right, Jared, we need you to go off and actually do the writing on it? Like, how does that actually work for a movie like Moana?
Yeah, it is it's different for every project, I'll say. So I'd say Zootopia, for example, Byron Howard had this idea of animals and the way that they might interact with each other. And then, like I said, I was lucky enough that when I came in to join the project, they had just torn it all the way down, and we need to build something new. We knew we had modern animals. We also knew it was going to be in a city, and that these dynamics were going to be at play. How that worked, for us to decide. Moana was actually moving concurrently at the exact same timeline, meaning we didn't know whether Zootopia was going to be in theaters first or Moana. And it could have gone either way. Zootopia came out in early, I think it was March of 2016, and then Moana came out in the fall. So it could have been the other way around when the projects were first beginning. So I'd say on that one, Ron Clements and John Musker, who are, I think the most famous Disney directors ever, Little Mermaid and Aladdin and everything you love, they did. They'd been working on it for a while. And they, sometimes different writers come in and try different things. But just as Zootopia is ramping down and we'd sort of gotten over the most difficult part of that process, Moana had cast Dwayne Johnson as Maui, and Ali'i Carvalho as Moana, and they were looking at those character dynamics. And I love writing fun, character back and forth. Like, characters are I think the thing that I enjoy the most, which they knew. And they said, okay, well, we're looking at these relationships Would you mind coming over to help out? And that was also when Don Hall, who also just directed Raya, and Chris Williams, both of them had also directed Big Hero 6. They had also joined the project as everything was trying to get done. And so we all talked about what's the structure. And then for me, it was a dream come true. You know, you're writing what was going from Zootopia, which is dozens and dozens of characters, to basically 2 people on a boat, which is almost a stage play.
Right.
It's a giant challenge from a writing perspective, because you have to make it interesting, and it really comes down to character dynamics. So on that one, well, we basically started from scratch in terms of those dynamics and what those characters would be, and having the specific actors in mind for those voices made a lot of difference. But you always have a ton of help. You know, there's many, like I said, many people doing all this. But for me, it was a joy to be able to work with all of them.
Absolutely. So you knew you were writing for The Rock. He had already been cast, and that's got to that's got to be wild. You probably I don't know, what year did you graduate, QO? Did you grow up watching him on In the Ring?
Yeah, no, I graduated in '92 from Quince Orchard.
Okay, so that was long before.
And yeah, it was eons before. Yeah, I think Dwayne and I are very similar ages. I think maybe he's only a couple of years older than I am.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, I was a huge fan of his, and in that role, he's just so good. And so really, I think what I try to do the most is just lean into his strong suits. I think for any actor that is playing one of your characters, it's always a combination of who that person actually is and the character that you have in your mind, and then you sort of find some way to meld them together into something that is unique and feels very in line with who that person actually is. That's one of my favorite things in the world.
Right. And afterwards he comes up and says, "Thank you for writing that." And you say, "You're welcome."
I will say that recording that song was one of my most favorite parts of Moana. That was a very fun day.
Oh, Lin-Manuel Miranda is a freaking genius, and How Far I'll Go, and Shiny, the whole everything.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we'll use Lin to segue into the reason we're here at long last. We've
I love
come
it.
to the present. Encanto. It is such a good one. I've seen it, I guess, twice. My wife's watched it 3 times and is playing it nonstop on Spotify, like everyone in America and around the world. How does the idea come up about? I know what I appreciated, at least, is the themes of this generational trauma, right? Like, there's not some evil Disney villain like before. Here, the antagonist is grandma, is the abuela, you know, but he just happens to be controlling and has these issues. But it's stuff that we can all relate to. So, sort of talk about the idea of writing a story that dealt with sort of a deep family sort of theme, like that generational trauma. That's important stuff for kids to hear.
It is, you know. I think that interesting. So Byron and I were already talking about what we were going to do next, even as we were finishing Zootopia. And we are both musicians, and we were like, we got to do a musical next. And then, like I said, I was concurrently working on Moana, and working with Lin was fantastic. And he was like, I want to do something else, but I want to do something set in Latin America somewhere. And so the 3 of us are like, this all makes sense. It would be a dream come true to do this. And so the first thing you do, honestly, is say, you have to find yourself in your stories. You have to have a deep personal connection. And so we all had to figure out what that was. All of us have these large extended families, and we hadn't seen a story that talked about that, and talked about different generations, how all of that, one generation affects the life of the next, and how we also don't really see each other in our families. We sort of have like one view. And it's really hard. Like, it's hard for me to see my mother as anything more than my mom. Like, there's a whole person there. There's a whole life there. Right. And that's the same for every member of your family. And we talked about that a lot. And so early on, our research was our own families. And then we started building the story about, I think in life, it's easy for us to look around and make judgments about things. And in this family, where we started talking about magic, and certainly once magical realism in Colombia came into the conversation, oh man, it could be this family that has these gifts. And what if one member of the family doesn't have it? How would that feel? But then also, like, that feels very relatable. I think many of us, definitely myself included, look around, you're like, everyone has it together. I don't know why I don't, but everyone also is dealing with that same thing. We just don't really talk about it. And so that became this, a tent pole. And then Charisse Castro-Smith, who is our co-director and co-writer, has an encyclopedic knowledge of magical realism. and also a deep family connection. Her family is Cuban American, and her family immigrated here, and that sense of trying to go to a new place, being displaced, and how those things affect different members of family. People that have gone through that versus hearing stories about it is very different. And so that whole opening, that whole core was written by her. The first time we read it, we're like, this is phenomenal and beautiful and the foundation of this story. So it's interesting. You never really know where the story is going to take you as you begin the journey. You know what's important to you. Telling a story about extended family, telling a story about how hard it is to see each other and self-worth. That was our true north. The way to get there is something that you discover along the way.
Oh, and absolutely. And such a great point you're saying about people, especially kids that might not know.
Sure.
Hey, they'd be like, hey, my brother's good at this, my sister's good at this, but what's my gift? Where do I place in the world? They will totally relate to the main character. Well, tell me about I know we're not supposed to talk about Bruno, but let's talk about Bruno. What's
Yes.
Where does that whole idea come about? Because the idea, and by the way, that's one of the things that Ray pays on repeat viewings is, oh, the rats in the walls, obviously. But man, I gotta blame you for making me cry. That scene where he's looking out, watching them eat dinner, and he's drawn he's drawn his own little plate. I'm getting
it's brutal.
Why'd you do that to me?
It's funny. That character was one we had very early on. Initially, he was a cousin. He was not an uncle. He was a cousin. We like the idea that someone in this family is almost a cautionary tale, that the weight of the responsibility, the weight of these gifts can sometimes go the wrong direction and be too much for somebody. So this idea that there's a black sheep of the family, that was what Mirabel could potentially become if she wasn't healed, if she couldn't, sort of make her way through, was something we needed that character to be there. The specificity of Bruno, as we started to work through the story, he got more and more interesting as we went, and we found that he's very funny. Like John Leguizamo absolutely kills it in this role. Only he could do this, but that character has to go from I got to be afraid of that guy to oh my God, he's really funny and sweet, and then oh no, he is tragic, and oh, I feel so terrible. And likewise, when I saw that, I was just like, God, you feel so much in that moment. So that's something that we took a long time to build. We tried many versions of that scene. Sometimes it was too sad throughout and it was too much, and then other times it was too jokey. And so you're really playing emotionally, going back and forth and trying to figure out the exact right balance of those emotions. And so they don't feel manipulative. They feel organic and real. That's something that's really important to us. But I'd say, John Leguizamo's performance, amazing. Mark Kennedy, he's a storyboard artist here, boarded that sequence. And when he had that little slit of light coming through and then looking down, you see that plate, we were like, all right, we're done. And then the animators get into it, and it's all those tiny expressions. So it's an enormous group effort, but you get these little nuggets of really beautiful emotion that you cling on to.
Oh, it's just what is it? What did Disney say? For every laugh, there's got to be a tear, and that's the teardrop, at least for me. Well, we got to talk about the music a little bit here. When you're writing the script, is it just there's little slots where you're okay, insert Lin song here, or do you kind of know the lyrics he's working with, or how does that work?
It's very chicken and the egg, and it depends on which song. Everything's different. So one of the big rules is you can't have a song unless a character must sing, meaning you can't arbitrarily say, okay, and music happens. Why does that character need to sing? You usually have to force them emotionally to a place where that becomes something that they would do. And over the course of the 5 years of making the movie, we actually, I have between Charisse and I, we have well over 1,000 drafts of this, because you're trying and rewriting. We also do the same thing visually. So in those 5 years, we actually draw the movie, edit it together, all black and white, sort of hand drawn, about 8 times. We have 8 screenings of the movie over those 5 years where we're trying different things. And early on, it's really difficult because you don't know the characters well enough. You have no music, but you're trying to tell people in the studio, hey, it's going to be a musical. There's no music, however. And so there's tricks. Sometimes you write a scene and you say there's going to be music here. Other times you'll put in a sort of a fake song, or they're a lot of music, and then you'll rhyme what the characters are saying. Or sometimes, in our very first screening, Lin wrote the original, the first song, the Family Madrigal song.
Family Madrigal
version. He wrote that a version for the first screening, but knowing it was going to change 1,000 times before the movie actually came out. So he gave us a version of, here, let's meet all the characters. Here's what they might sound like. That changed a bunch, of course, over the while making it. But it's every single song is a little different, and you never know where exactly a song is supposed to be. I will say that one of my great joy in life is that early on, I will sometimes write fake lyrics that are really terrible intentionally to mess with Lynn, and that is something that he hates and I love as a result. So that's one of my guilty pleasures.
Like, no, Lynn, we're using this terrible song. I know you're a Broadway, but no, it's mine.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Family Madrigal. I'm amazed how much information you pack into that introductory song. You got to meet all of the different grandkids and everything. But it works. It pulls it off and sets the stage. But honestly, I think my favorite is Surface Pressure. I think that one is just drip drip. It's amazing. Talk about that song specifically. How that came together.
That was one of the. I think that was the second song. So after Family Madrigal, he wrote that song, and that song when it came in was very close to what you hear in the movie. Even his demo is very, very close. That was a huge help to us because we were trying to figure out this character of Luisa, what her vibe, what her tone is. And early on, he's like, it's got to be a reggaeton. Like, she's a strong character to play with that, and then have the bridge of the song, that sort of in the middle of it open up, and you get this sort of airy, unburdened version, and then it's right back to that very modern feel. That's something that Lynn wanted from the beginning. I'd say that what was great for Charisse and I was that when we heard the lyrics, they were actually a much more clear window into Luisa's issues than we initially thought the song was going to do. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we heard it and we thought it was phenomenal, we actually went through the entire script and adjusted all of Luisa's lines throughout everything because we understood her better. And that's a great example of where the music can really change a story and elevate a story. And so, yeah, I'd say the other thing that was great was, and then you move down the line and you get into actually making the song, and our music team is stellar. I think that when Jess Darrow came in and absolutely crushed that song, she's a phenomenal talent. And then all the musicians coming in. And I think the really cool thing is it has a very modern feel. We didn't want to have a musical where it all felt like music from a specific era. We wanted to bounce all around. I think many different years of types of music, because Colombia is such an amazing music mecca, and music, you can hear a song from today, from 50 years ago, from 10 years ago, and you're listening to those things constantly. We wanted the movie to feel like that.
Oh, absolutely. And it does. And that Surface Pressure song I just think it's the show stealer. I love it. It's like my underrated, that's the one. But of course, the big phenomenon, the one everyone's going to remember is We Don't Talk About Bruno.
Yeah.
What was it like, kind of, the movie comes out and you're probably a fan of all the songs, but what was it like watching that snowball just grew and grew and grew, and it became and ironically, you guys you had to choose which song you submitted Dos Oruguitas, how do you say it, Dos
Oruguitas
to the Oscars, not knowing how big Bruno would become. But just talk about that whole phenomenon of Bruno.
Oh, I mean, it's it is unbelievable. Literally unbelievable. Like, I remember when the movie came out, and obviously Bruno's a song that we loved. It's a very specific type of song. It's an ensemble song. There's a lot of information in there. I always thought, like, well, to enjoy it, you have to be watching the movie, because otherwise none of it makes sense, because you're talking about all these character interactions. But it was also one where Lynn, I feel like, had the most fun, because he's bouncing from character to character. Each character has a different tone, different vibe. Right. Some of them are there's gossip about Bruno, but others are talking about their own issues. And so you're learning about them at the same time. And then there's also story happening, that's Mirabel trying to put together this vision that is cracked. And by the end of it, she realizes she's front and center in it. So I think one of the most amazing things is that every Friday night for the last probably 2.5, 3 years, we would get together with Lynn. He was on the East Coast. And we would, Friday night at 6 o'clock, he'd put his kids to bed, 9 o'clock his time on the East Coast, 6 o'clock our time. And we talk what the music was going to be, and he'd share a snippet of something he was working on, or we'd talk about, we found this moment, and we think that this is probably a zone to get started in. and we were talking about that Bruno song, and we said, well, it's a great song to hear everyone's opinions. We need to set this guy up as the villain of our story, so it's got to have these dark parts of it. There's a lot of gossip, and he's like, yeah. So it's kind of like he goes, I think it's like a feels like it'd be a spooky Montuno type of song. And he turned on our Zoom to his keyboard and went dung 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 and wrote it in real time in front of us. And we were just like, I think that's it. And like 3 days later, we had his demo, and it was him singing all of the parts. So if you can imagine, it was 10 Lins singing the We Don't Talk About Bruno song. It was so good and so entertaining, so fun. And it's dead center of the movie. It's like this burst of energy. That's phenomenal. And then when the movie comes out, I did not have TikTok at the time. And people are like, you gotta go on TikTok. And I'm like, what is it? I don't even understand what that is. Like, I think I'm barely understanding Twitter now. What is it? And they're like, just go. And I went, and I couldn't believe it. It was so exciting because so many people found their way into this song. And it wasn't just like one person doing one thing. It was all of the characters being represented, people finding their own ends or their own comedic moments or spooky things. And just to see the way that people put themselves into that story, it's like a dream. It's absolutely a dream come true. And the most amazing, surprising thing I could have imagined from this movie.
Yeah, you're telling people, you telling the story, or am I? It's everyone else. It's everyone else is telling it now. Oh, yeah. That's so awesome. Well, in hindsight, just bringing it full circle back to the Oscars. I mean, obviously it wins Best Animated Feature. That's the great one. But in hindsight, are you wishing that you guys submitted that one? Or Lynn could be an EGOT right now, but then again, he was home with his family with COVID, so maybe it's a blessing in disguise. He can do the EGOT when he's actually there.
Yeah, I'd say this. I'd say and something that Lynn said too, like the fact that people have found this music, like every song in this movie, and everyone has found their way into those songs is incredible. The fact that it was the #1 album for weeks worldwide is insane. That there was a time where all of our songs were in the top 100 Billboard concurrently. It's never happened. So I think Lynn is very happy with how that went. I'd say in retrospect, what would we have done for the Oscars? Not a thing different. I think that to hear Dos Orejitas, which is the emotional core of our story, a song that's completely in Spanish, 100%. That's very, very important to us. It's very important for the country of Colombia. That was, we have so many good friends there. 100% we do that. The fact that we got to hear both songs at the Oscars, I don't know that that's ever happened. So I just feel like we are very fortunate, very, very fortunate throughout. And I'm not worried about Lynn achieving an EGOT. It's just a matter of time.
It is. And like you're saying, it's an embarrassment of riches with all the songs you could have chosen. So, well, I really appreciate you joining us. What should we say in closing about Encanto? I mean, or actually, you know what? Let's end this way. If there's other local people, other people at Quince Orchard or growing up in the area listening to WTOP, what advice would you give them, or pep talk? And if they want to pursue this, what would you say? Binge all the Disney movies and then make your way out to LA. What's your advice?
Well, yeah, I'd say this. I'd say that I was very lucky to have people that pushed me, that challenged me, but also said that they I had a voice that people would want to listen to. And I think that's what I'd say to anyone who's interested. Is this is very true. We need new voices. Your specific voice is really, really important. I'd say much more important than trying to figure out what Hollywood might want is we want you. We want individual, unique perspectives. That's critical. Anyone, if I can be here having this conversation with you, anyone can do that. And so just continuing to follow that passion is really important. I started in the late 80s making dumb home videos with my friends, and we made a lot of dumb home videos, never knowing where that would go, but it was just something that we really like doing. So if that's something that you really like doing, follow that.
Hey, I need to know, what was one of the dumb home videos?
Oh man,
my twin brother and I went home from watching Home Alone and we made Boy by Himself. Now, what was that for you?
Well, you know what? I would say that there's some of them, and the names of those that I probably can't mention right now. I'd say that my brother Joel and my best friend Jeff and Brian made a lot of ridiculous stories. My brother made one called Hot Cop Part 2 that is one of my most favorite things that I ever got to do. But I'd say that we shot them all around DC, and several times we were pulled over by the police, who were wondering what we were doing and why we were wearing wigs and chasing people across bridges and tossing bungee jumped dummies, over the side of a highway. So, we made some interesting choices, but here I am. So I guess it worked out.
Hot Cop Part 2. Everyone, check it out.
Yeah, get in there.
Final second. What was your Disney movie then? I gotta know. Growing up,
Jungle Book, 100%.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, had to be. Yeah, it was the first one I remember seeing in the theater, and also it was a musical, and I loved the villain, and the villain wanted to eat the main character, who was a child. So I'm like, I don't know how you made me like that character, but amazing. So for me, that the music and the whole everything about it, I loved it.
Oh, George Sanders as Shere Khan. You're right. One of the all-timers. Wow.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jared Bush. This has been great. And everyone go check out Encanto for the 20th time. And you pick up new things every time you see it. So congrats on the Oscar. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All right. Catch you later.
See ya. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.